Matthew 24:39. And knew not until the deluge came. The source and cause of their ignorance was, that unbelief had blinded their minds, as, on the other hand, we are informed by the Apostle, that Noah beheld at a distance, by the eyes of faith, the vengeance of God which was still concealed, so as to entertain an early dread of it. Hebrews 11:7, and here Christ compares Noah with the rest of the world, and Lot with the inhabitants of Sodom, that believers may learn to withdraw, lest they wander and be cut off along with others. But it must be observed that the reprobate, at that time, were hardened in their wickedness, because the Lord did not show his grace to any but his servants, by giving them a salutary warning to beware in proper time. Not that information of the future deluge was altogether withheld from the inhabitants of the world before whose eyes Noah, in building the ark for more than 100 years, presented a warning of the approaching calamity, but because one man was specially warned, by divine revelation, of the future destruction of the whole world, and raised up to cherish the hope of salvation. Though the report of the Last Judgment is now widely circulated, and though there are a few persons who have been taught by God to perceive that Christ will come as a judge in due time, yet it is proper that those persons should be aroused by this extraordinary kindness of God, and that their senses should be sharpened, lest they give themselves up to the indifference which so generally prevails. For Peter compares the ark of Noah with our baptism on this ground, that a small company of men, separated from the multitude, is saved amidst the waters, 1 Peter 3:20-21, to this small number. Therefore, our minds must be directed, if we desire to escape in safety. Matthew 24:40. 2 men shall then be in the field. Before mentioning this, Luke inserts some sentences, the first of which is presented by Matthew as belonging to the destruction of Jerusalem. Let not him who shall be on the housetop go down into his house to carry away his furniture. But it is possible that Christ applied the same words to various subjects. Luke states also a warning, that the disciples should remember Lot's wife, that is, that they should forget those things which are behind, Philippians 3:13, and advance towards the end of the heavenly calling. For Lot's wife was changed into a pillar of salt, Genesis 19:26, because, hesitating whether there were good reasons for departing from the city, she looked behind her, by which she gave the lie to the heavenly oracle. Perhaps, too, regret at leaving her nest, in which she had dwelt with comfort, induced her to turn her head. Since, therefore, God intended that she should remain as an everlasting demonstration, our minds ought to be strengthened by the constancy of faith, that they may not hesitate and give way in the middle of the course, and they ought also to be trained to perseverance, in order that, bidding adieu to the fascinations of a transitory life, they may rise cheerfully and willingly towards heaven. Luke adds a third sentence, whosoever shall seek to save his soul will lose it, that the desire of an earthly life may not prevent believers from passing rapidly through the midst of death, to the salvation laid up for them in heaven. And Christ employs a strong expression to denote the frailty of the present life, when he says that souls, zogonauntai, that is, are begotten into life, when they are lost. His meaning is the same as if he had declared that int do not live in the world, because the commencement of that life which is real, and which is worthy of the name, is, to leave the world. Luke afterwards adds what we find also in Matthew, that husbands and wives will then be separated, that the ticks by which human beings are bound to each other in the world may not hinder or retard the godly, for it frequently happens that, while men are paying attention to each other, not one of them advances a step. In order, therefore, that every man in his own department, freed from every bond and impediment, may run with cheerfulness, Christ informs us that, out of a single couple, one partner will be taken, while the other is left. Not that all who are united must of necessity be thus separated, for the sacred bond of piety will cause a believing wife to cleave to a believing husband, and will cause children to accompany their father. But Christ only intended, in order to cut off every occasion of delay, to enjoin every one to make haste, that those who already prepared may not waste their time in waiting for their companions. Immediately afterwards Luke adds, "Where the carcass is, there will the eagles also be gathered together," which must not, however, be restricted to the last day, but as the disciples had asked, "Where, Lord?" That is, how shall we stand erect amidst so great shaking? And how shall we remain safe amidst such dangerous storms? And to what places of concealment shall we resort for protection, when we are united? Christ declares, as we find in Matthew, that he is the banner of solid union, and in which all the children of God must be gathered. Matthew 24:42. Watch therefore. In Luke the exhortation is more pointed, or, at least, more special. Take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, and drunkenness, and the cares of this life. And certainly he who, by living in intemperance, has his senses overloaded with food and wine, will never elevate his mind to meditation on the heavenly life. But as there is no desire of the flesh that does not intoxicate a man, they ought to take care, in all these respects, not to satiate themselves with the world, if they wish to advance with speed to the kingdom of Christ. The single word watch, which we find in Matthew, denotes that uninterrupted attention which keeps our minds in full activity, and makes us pass through the world like pilgrims. In the account given by Mark, the disciples are first enjoined to take heed lest, through carelessness or indolence, ruin overtake them, and next are commanded to watch, because various allurements of the flesh are continually creeping upon us, and lulling our minds to sleep. Next follows an exhortation to prayer, because it is necessary to seek elsewhere the supplies that are necessary for supporting our weakness. Luke dictates the very form of prayer: first, that God may be pleased to rescue us from so deep and intricate a labyrinth, and next, that he may present us safe and sound in presence of his Son, for we shall never be able to reach it but by miraculously escaping innumerable deaths. And as it was not enough to pass through the course of the present life by rising superior to all dangers, Christ places this as the most important, that we may be permitted to stand before his tribunal. For you know not at what hour your Lord will come. It ought to be observed, that the uncertainty as to the time of Christ's coming, which almost all treat as an encouragement to sloth, ought to be felt by us to be an excitement to attention and watchfulness. God intended that it should be hidden from us, for the express purpose that we may keep diligent watch without the relaxation of a single hour. For what would be the trial of faith and patience, if believers, after spending their whole life in ease, and indolence, and pleasure, were to prepare themselves within the space of 3 days for meeting Christ?